But yeah, the magazine is just trash. I will say this to anyone. The magazine, The Economist, is trash. You heard it from me, an ex-employee.
When the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part.
Okay, folks, I have a confession to make. I worked for The Economist for 7 years. Not for the magazine, but for the intelligence unit, which in retrospective I find much more respectable than having worked for the magazine because I have a lot of issues with the magazine. To be honest, I've never liked it. I never liked it when I joined, and I liked it even less when I left. And part of the reason is, well, I think they're ideologically incredibly biased and incredibly partial to many issues that they should at least pretend to be more neutral on. The Economist is not a newspaper, even though it calls itself that. It's basically a giant op ed magazine. That's really because they have an opinion on everything they write about, which most newspapers don't do. There's a separate opinion page versus the news, which doesn't usually come with an opinion. The Economist doesn't do that. Almost every single article that they write has a political opinion on it. And they admit to some extent their bias. But I think, like I said, there are issues where you should at least pretend to be neutral on the subject matter. But anyway, there have been numerous covers over this period that I worked there that when I would receive the magazine every Friday morning on my desk, I would look at it and the thought of quitting the company in a fit of rage would cross my mind. I never did that. Maybe if I worked for the magazine, I would have done that. Some of their coverage of Latin America in particular was pretty appalling. It still is pretty appalling, to be honest. And their cover for this week, I think, has been by far their worst. And we're going to look at this cover, we're going to read the article, and I think the problem with this cover is that it genuinely reveals what their actual ideological sympathies are. It reveals the reptilian form behind the human skin that they often try and pass themselves off as. So let's look at the cover first and foremost. That's it. The threat from the illiberal left. And I would say, first and foremost, really bad timing, guys, because this was a week in which Texas effectively struck down the state's abortion laws, and you would they recognize this. I think they put in some words at the very last minute, but talking about the illiberal left when the U.S. is currently in the midst of major right wing opposition to anything good happening in society is quite rich. But let's read the article, which is it's as bad, if not worse, than the cover. So it's called "The Threat from the Illiberal Left." Don't underestimate the danger of left-leaning identity politics. Something has gone very wrong with Western liberalism. At its heart, classical liberalism believes human progress is brought about by debate and reform. The best way to navigate disruptive change in a divided world is through universal commitment to individual dignity, open markets, and limited government. Yet a resurgent China sneers at liberalism for being selfish, decadent, and unstable. At home, populists on the right and left rage at liberalism for its supposed elitism and privilege. That is factually true, by the way, because yeah, that is the state of wealth inequality in the U.S., and this is brought about by economically liberal policies. The U.S., as much as it has been affected by the populist sort of fascist strand of republicanism that Trump has represented in recent years, is still fundamentally an economically liberal party. It's still largely defined. The U.S. is an economically liberal country, which should be what the magazine wants. But yeah, this is true. Anyway, over the past 250 years, classical liberalism has helped bring about unparalleled progress for some people. It will not vanish in a puff of smoke, but it is going a severe test, just as it did a century ago when the cancers of Bolshevism and fascism began to eat away at liberal Europe from within. It is time for liberals to understand what they are up against and to fight back. Nowhere is the fight fiercer than in America, where this week the Supreme Court chose not to strike down a draconian and bizarre anti-abortion law. The most dangerous threat in liberalism's spiritual home comes from the Trumpian right. Okay, so at least they'll admit it, though clearly this article is not going to be focused on the Trumpian right. Populists denigrate liberal edifices such as science and the rule of law as facades for a plot by the deep state against the people. They subordinate facts and reason to tribal emotion. The enduring falsehood that the presidential election in 2020 was stolen points to where such impulses lead. If people cannot settle their differences using debate and trusted institutions, they resort to force. The attack from the left is harder to grasp, partly because in America, liberal has come to include an illiberal left. So I agree with this point. I've always hated how the word liberal in the US means leftist. It really should not be the case. We described this week how a new style of politics has recently spread from elite university departments. How is this? You see where this is going, by the way. Do you hear the slight Kermit-like accent of Jordan Peterson kind of behind this, or the incredibly fast monotone of Ben Shapiro inspiring these words? It gets much worse. We described this week how a new style of politics has recently spread from elite university departments. As young graduates have taken jobs in the upmarket media and in politics, business, and education, they have brought with them a horror of feeling unsafe and an agenda obsessed with a narrow vision of obtaining justice for oppressed identity groups. They have also brought along tactics to enforce ideological purity by no platforming their enemies and canceling allies who have transgressed, with echoes of the confessional state that dominated Europe before classical liberalism took root at the end of the 18th century. Is this starting to sound like a Dave Rubin episode? Yeah, it is. It is. This could be the script of any Dave Rubin video. Superficially, the illiberal left and classical liberals like The Economist want many of the same things. Both believe that people should be able to flourish whatever their sexuality or race. They share a suspicion of authority and entrenched interests. They believe in the desirability of change. However, classical liberals and illiberal progressives could hardly disagree more over how to bring these changes about. For classical liberals, the precise direction of progress is unknowable. It must be spontaneous and from the bottom up. So this is basically, and this is kind of the argument that I make in my book. This is a recipe for not wanting progress, for basically just supporting the status quo wherever that takes you, and just complaining that anyone who doesn't support the status quo is a reactionary that wants to bring people back into the Dark Ages. That is kind of the argument that all these liberals always want to make. And they usually use it against the left more than they use it against the right, because liberals tend to cozy up to the right much more than they do to the left, despite the admission right here that they have more in common with the left. Anyway. And it depends on the separation of power so that nobody nor any group is able to exert lasting control. By contrast, the illiberal left put their own power at the center of things because they are sure real progress is possible only after they have come to see it that racial, sexual, and other hierarchies are dismantled. Yeah, because that kind of is... You don't achieve progress without dismantling the hierarchies that are impeding progress. That is, this is so funny because... This is exactly what capitalists did back in the early, late 18th, early 19th century. This is, Adam Smith, by the standards of his day, was a freaking progressive because he wanted to dismantle the authorities of mercantilism, the aristocrats, the gold hoarders, all these merchant bankers who basically had the entire economy captured. And Adam Smith promoted capitalism as a way to allow markets so that markets could allow wealth to spread to other people who better deserved it. So Adam Smith was a progressive. I've always argued this. I know that a lot of socialists and people on the left hate Adam Smith because his sort of association with free markets and neoliberalism, and because you have libertarian think tanks using his name. But Adam Smith was incredibly progressive for his day, incredibly progressive. So it's funny that they're against the very things that actually brought about the creation of The Economist, because The Economist was created in 1843 to argue against the to argue in favor of the repeal of the Corn Laws in Britain. So there was clearly a hierarchy that The Economist wanted to dismantle at the time. And now they're saying that this is somehow bad. See how it works? This is how you go from essentially being like the challenger to the system to becoming the system, and to preventing any other challenge to that system that you created. Anyway, the difference in method has profound implications. Classical liberals believe in setting fair initial conditions and letting events unfold through competition by, say, eliminating corporate monopolies, opening up guilds. What the hell? Opening up guilds? What are we still in like the Hanseatic League in the medieval ages? What the hell? I will give them that. They have been far more critical than a lot of other right-wing magazines in their criticism of monopolies. So credit where credit is due. Radically reforming taxation and making education accessible with vouchers. What? Am I in like a time warp from the 1990s and 2000s? This is like classical, like post-Washington consensus economic policy. This is like the shit you would expect from the Bush administration. What the hell? How did this pass edit? How many people saw this article and immediately thought like, is this really the kind of education policy we want to support? Vouchers? Do they not realize that part of the greatness of liberalism's spiritual home, America, was because of its public education system? This is a fact, kiddies. The U.S. had the best public education system in the world at one time, and that is part of the reason why it had an educated workforce that could immediately adopt new technologies and create new technologies, and that's what really triggered its massive industrial expansion in the second half of the 19th century. Its public education system, not vouchers. Anyway, progressives see laissez-faire as a pretense which powerful vested interests use to preserve the status quo. Yeah, that's exactly the result of laissez-faire. This is from 1980, when laissez-faire became the standard economic model of the United States and much of the West. That is the result of laissez-faire. You want to really argue against this? Where was I? Yeah, laissez-faire is a pretense with which powerful vested interests use to preserve the status quo. Instead, they believe in imposing equity, the outcomes that they deem just. For example, Ibram X. Kendi, a scholar activist, asserts that any colorblind policy, including the standardized testing of children, is racist if it ends up increasing average race differentials, however enlightened the intention behind it. Yeah, this is kind of true. I don't see why this is controversial. If you have a policy that is supposed to help people and all it does is make the race gap worse, because social policy should be focused on eliminating the race gap among other gaps. Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is racist. I mean, it's not racist by intention, but it's racist if you don't see that the outcomes are increasing racism, and yet you still maintain that policy. That's where the racist comes. I don't want to suggest that all colorblind policies are racist, but yeah, if the outcomes exacerbate race differences and you don't do anything about it, yeah, you're part of the problem. Mr. Kendi is right to want an anti-racist policy that works, but his blunderbuss approach risks denying some disadvantaged children the help they need and others the chance to realize their talents. Individuals, not just groups, must be treated fairly for society to flourish. Besides, society has many goals. People worry about economic growth, welfare, crime, the environment, and national security, and policies cannot be judged simply on whether they advance a particular group. Classical liberals use debate to hash out priorities and trade offs in a pluralist society, and then use elections to settle on a course. That's not what happens. Come on, give me a fucking break. That doesn't happen. First of all these classical liberal clowns never, ever want to debate leftists. They never do. They always chicken out. Secondly, the media, which is dominated by classical liberal ideology, they rarely have progressives on their shows. All these debates are merely within their own ecosystem. Take Afghanistan is a perfect example of this. Who were they bringing on their shows? All these, CNN, MSNBC. Who were they bringing on their shows? Ex-military people who are now in the board of directors of major defense contractors. Yeah, that's really unbiased. That's the kind of debate that you want? Come on. Surely you can't realize that the treatment that is given to the left is the same that is given to liberals or even to the right. You gotta be kidding me. And The Economist has contributed to this, I should add, because they had covers of Corbyn, with like a commie outfit, when they never had anything remotely similar to Boris Johnson or Theresa May. So they've contributed to this. Anyway, the illiberal left believe that the marketplace of ideas, again, this is written basically by the intellectual dark web. Like I said, this could be any Dave Rubin video, where he's the marketplace of ideas, all these ideas. I can't handle all these high level ideas. Is rigged just like all the others. Yeah, I just explained why it's rigged. Do you think anyone on The Economist is going to want to debate this with anyone? Here's an open challenge, by the way. Whoever wrote this, I will challenge you to a debate on my channel. You're not going to do it, obviously, because it's a tiny channel. No one knows who I am. But that's the open challenge. What masquerades as evidence and argument, they say, is really yet another assertion of raw power by the elite. Yeah, it kind of is. I mean, if by debate you mean the media is not free. Not in Britain, not in the US. Progressive of the old school remain champions of free speech, but illiberal progressives think that equity requires the field to be tilted against those who are privileged and reactionary. Yeah, that is how you challenge privilege, by tilting the playing field, because it's already tilted. Why do they assume that the playing field is level right now? This is ridiculous. Unbelievable. Again, this is straight out of the alt-lite, straight out of the intellectual dark web. There's no such thing as structural racism because there's no racism laws anymore. That's the same argument. This is exactly same. This is Jordan Peterson writing. Seriously, this is Jordan Peterson. This means restricting their freedom of speech using a caste system of victimhood in which those on top must defer to those with a greater claim to restorative justice. Well, to some extent that is true. Don't tell me that white people need to be the ones who determine how to resolve the problems of black people without ever talking to black people. This is pure bullshit. It also involves making an example of supposed reactionaries by punishing them when they say something that is taken to make someone who is less privileged feel unsafe. The results are calling out, cancellation, and no platforming, which I should add the right engages with all the time as well. So this is not a problem of the illiberal left. And as for no platforming, I already explained. Where is the media opening up spaces for progressive voices? They don't. The left doesn't have a platform. That's why we're all on friggin' YouTube and Twitter. Because people with my views and people with, whether you're socialist, whether you're progressive, etc., you don't have like a weekly space in the media or in newspapers at all. So don't give this bullshit excuse that you're being that the left is engaging in no platforming just because they complained that some friggin' racist couldn't go speak at a university. This is so fucking hypocrite. This is why I hate liberals, because they're fucking hypocrites. Milton Friedman once said the society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither. He was right. I don't know. There's a lot of countries that have put equality at least at the same level of freedom, the Scandinavians, etc., and they're doing pretty damn well. In fact, it's the societies that put freedom ahead of equality that definitely does not reach anything resembling equality. The liberal progressives think they have a blueprint for freeing oppressed groups. In reality, theirs is a formula for the oppression of individuals. Oh, again, I can read this in my Jordan Peterson impression, and it's going to be exactly like anything he said. The liberal progressives think they have a blueprint for freeing oppressed groups. In reality, theirs is a formula for the oppression of individuals. And in that, it's not so very different from the plans of the populist right. In their different ways, both extremes put power before process, ends before means, and the interest of the group before the freedom of the individual. Now I need to go and take my benzos and eat raw meat. Countries run by the strong men whose populists admire, such as Hungary under Viktor Orban and Russia under Vladimir Putin, show that unchecked power is a bad foundation for good government. Utopias like Cuba and Venezuela show that ends do not justify means, and nowhere at all do individuals willingly conform to state-imposed racial and economic stereotypes. When populists put partisanship before truth, they sabotage good government. When progressives divide people into competing castes, they turn the nation against itself. Both diminish institutions that resolve social conflict. Hence, they often resort to coercion, however much they like to talk about justice. The illiberal left doesn't have power. They don't have power. If you're complaining about like cancel culture or excessive wokeness from corporations, it's because they realize that there's a significant amount of people who are into these ideas and therefore they cater to them. It's not an expression of the power of the woke left against, the business sector. It's the business sector realizing they can sell more shit to people who believe in these ideas. What's stunning about this is that they're putting the illiberal left, however they want to call it, in a position of so much power that is completely undeserved. The left doesn't have this power anywhere. If classical liberalism is so much better than the alternatives, why is it struggling around the world? One reason is because it's fucking failing. That's why. Because you had a friggin' economic crisis in 2008, 2009 that basically destroyed the economic fundamentals of liberalism. That's why. Then you had 10 years of friggin' austerity. And now you have a friggin' pandemic. That's why it's struggling. Because it has no answers to any of the world's major solutions. Liberalism does not have an answer to climate change. It doesn't have an answer to inequality. It doesn't have an answer to anything. It doesn't have an answer to resolving global conflicts because liberals are the biggest fucking warmongers of them all. Liberalism doesn't have an answer. It doesn't have a solution. It doesn't have a blueprint for progress. That's why people are pissed. Anyway, one reason is that populists and progressives feed off each other pathologically. The hatred each camp feels for the other inflames its own supporters to the benefit of both. Criticizing your own tribe's excesses seems like treachery. Under these conditions, liberal debate is starved of oxygen. Just look at Britain, where politics in the past few years was consumed by the rows between uncompromising Tory Brexiteers and the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. Yeah, the difference is that the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn wasn't in power. Again, this is so disingenuous to put these two sides as if they were equals. They were not. Jeremy Corbyn was the opposition. They were not in power. Also, The Economist was very much involved in this debate on Brexit. It's just making a hissy fit because it lost. And I should add, if The Economist had supported Ed Miliband back in 2015, we wouldn't have had fucking Brexit. So they picked the wrong people because everyone is too left for them. And then when the right wing comes to power and they fuck everything up, somehow it's still the left's fault. That's the game that they play, the blame game. They never accept their responsibility for the country that they live in. This is the meme of the guy riding the bicycle and then puts a stick on the wheels and then falls down and then just blames anyone but himself for putting the stick there. This is exactly what The Economist is doing. In short, it is hard work to be a genuine liberal. Oh, poor things. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, when their last ideological challengers seemed to crumble, arrogant elites lost touch with liberalism's humility and self-doubt. Is there anything humble and self-doubting in this piece? Nothing. Nothing. They haven't changed. They fell into the habit of believing they were always right. Exactly what this piece is doing. They engineered America's meritocracy to favor people like them. And you end up with this shit. Far from treating white working class critics with dignity, they sneered at their supposed lack of sophistication. This complacency has let opponents blame lasting imperfections on liberalism. Because you're at fault. So this is so hilarious. It's like, well, liberals used to be humble and had self-doubt, but none of this is our fault. Because of the treatment of race in America, to insist the whole country was rotten from the start. Yeah, it was. It was. In the face of persistent inequality and racism, classical liberals can remind people that change takes time. How long are you going to wait to solve racial issues that have existed for 200 years and you can't still fucking solve them? How long are we going to wait until you actually support a Green New Deal or some radical action on climate change? Because The Economist does not support the Green New Deal. They act like they support climate change, but they don't. Because they will never support anything that significantly affects the profits of the companies that they are ultimately defending. That's who they stand for. There is no time for this. But Washington is broken, China is storming ahead, and people are restless. I mean, Britain is also broken, I should add. Liberal lack of conviction. The ultimate complacency would be for classical liberals to underestimate the threat. Too many right-leaning liberals are inclined to choose a shameless marriage of convenience with populists. That's what you do. That's what The Economist does. I mean, if they thought that right-wing populism was such a threat, that Boris Johnson was such a threat for the country because he was a liar, a pathological liar and a racist, why didn't you support Jeremy Corbyn as the lesser of two evils? No, you didn't. Too many left-leaning liberals focus on how they too want social justice. They comfort themselves with the thought that the most intolerant illiberalism belongs to a fringe, which is true. At least this kind of woke SJW liberalism they're complaining about, yeah, that is a fringe. That's not a majority. Don't worry, they say. Intolerance is part of the mechanism of change. By focusing on injustice, they shift the center of ground. Yet it is precisely by countering the forces propelling people to the extremes that classic liberals prevent the extremes from strengthening. By applying liberal principles, they solve society's many problems without anyone resorting to coercion. Now they're sounding libertarian. But no, this is patently false. Liberalism has not solved society's major problems. They have created them. Only liberals appreciate diversity in all its... You gotta be kidding me. Name me one fucking liberal Western country that has like open immigration. None. There is none. And understand how to make it a strength. Only they can deal fairly with everything from education to planning. You mean your vouchers? The voucher strategy that you're proposing? That's your brilliant policy for education? And foreign policy. All the wars that you've supported. I don't remember if The Economist supported the Iraq War. I would not be surprised if they did, at least sort of subtly. But they have sort of turned a blind eye to a lot of coups d'états in Latin America, for example, and other actions of illiberal right-wing regimes. I mean, it's a running joke that they're sort of complacent about the illiberal things that like Bolsonaro does, or the coup in Bolivia. which they definitely supported the coup in Bolivia, by the way. They agreed with the idea that the election had been stolen, which it wasn't. Anyway, classical liberals must rediscover their fighting spirit. They should take on the bullies and cancelers. The Economist hasn't been cancelled. The Economist also hasn't been bullied. They are in a privileged position, but acting like the victims, which is exactly what the alt-lite does, what the IDW does. Failing to recognize that they are in a position of power, yet they feel like they're victims. Liberalism is still the best engine for equitable progress. No, it's not. Liberals must have the courage to say so. Yeah, that is the stupidest Economist cover article that I have ever read. And the bar is low. It is unbelievable that this passed any kind of editorial scrutiny, that it passed editorial debate, because The Economist has some very lively editorial debates. But clearly, this is the line that they're gonna tell from now on. Essentially, the exact same arguments that you see from the intellectual dark web, from the alt-lite. In fact, I joked about this when they tweeted the link to their cover. I responded with this. In other unrelated news, this is The Economist's first issue under its new editorial board. This is exactly the kind of shit you would imagine that these people would write. Well, some of them. I don't think Dave Rubin can actually like physically write. But yeah, those are the same arguments recycled. And like I said, I don't know what is going on here, but this really, really, really looks like The Economist finally shedding its human skin and revealing the reptile inside. But what an absolute fucking shame of an article. What an absolute fucking shame of a cover. This is embarrassing. And honestly, it's disgusting to think that I worked for them when they produce something like this. But thankfully, I didn't work for the magazine. I still have a lot of respect for my colleagues at the intelligence unit. Lots of smart people. Surprisingly, lots of lefty people. But yeah, the magazine is just trash. I will say this to anyone. The magazine, The Economist, is trash. You heard it from me, an ex-employee. On that note, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, please share. Most importantly, please subscribe. And unsubscribe from The Economist. Yeah, there's much better places to get your information. Thanks for watching.